first thing I need to do, I suppose, is to welcome our guests. We have Paul Haswell from Pinsent Masons, Sonal Patel from Quantcast, Jess OReilly from Twilio, Rachael Gibbens from Cisco, and Justin Hunt, of course, who we've just been chatting to. So good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing?
Good, very good, despite that shocker about data ethics and security, but I've recovered just enough to take part now.
What are your thoughts, Paul?
I think people are probably not putting it as a priority because they're sick of hearing about it, quite frankly. But I saw the words GDPR on the poll and everyone thought, oh God, not GDPR. Of course, now I'm here in Hong Kong and we've got China's version of GDPR, the PIPL, which is causing immense headaches as well. And it's very similar, but less easy to follow, if that makes sense.
Well, look, I'm sure there's those people working within that realm. If they need to understand more about that, then do feel free to put questions within the chat. Do let us know from our invited experts today. Anything you want to know more about, pitch in with the chat, and we'll see how much wisdom we can extract from them. So I think the first thing to do is just to ask everyone just to introduce themselves. We may or may not have come across you before, so I'm just going to do the obvious thing, go around the room and ask you all to let us know who you are, what you do, and where you do it. And I suppose any thoughts you've got so far on the things that we've discussed so far. I'm going to start just the order that I see people on my screen. Jess OReilly. Good afternoon, Jess.
Hey, Clive. Thanks for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. So to answer your questions, Clive, Jess OReilly. I'm based in Singapore. I'm looking at a beautiful hot afternoon. For those that are in Singapore, you're nodding probably at me. And I work for an organization called Twilio. So I'm not sure if anyone has any recognition of that, but we are an awesome tech company, HQ'd out of San Fran, but growing rapidly in Asia and really trying to solve for how we democratize communication with customers. So if you're someone that receives communications, it's probably likely that Twilio is powering that, whether they be notifications on vaccinations or notifications that your grab car is here. All of these things are what Twilio empowers. But I think the thing I've learned so much and I'm really keen to unpack is not only do I work for a tech company, but I have a responsibility to lead a large team across Asia. And so I'm sure we're going to unpack a lot of the great things about that, but also the challenges, as we move to this hybrid workforce. So yeah, lots to talk about. But I think I would say my passions encompass both the people aspect of the conversation we've talked about so far, but very much the data and tech space, because that's where my life is spent. What stood out to me though, and I love what Justin said earlier, I think external perspectives are so important. I think we do get so obsessed in our world that we often, when we're taking breaks from Zoom, it's to go and talk to our friends potentially or our family, which is so critical. But how do we do the networking that we used to do when we'd be at events like this, or when we'd go, to networking events for work? And so it's forums like this that give us that chance to do it digitally. And I think it's a good reminder. I think I haven't valued that enough this year, Justin, and it's something on my list for 2022 to focus on some more. So thanks for having me, Clive.
Oh, great. Looking forward to hearing more. Thanks, Jess. Next up, we have Paul Haswell of Pinsent Masons. Hey there, Paul.
Hello. So I am a technology lawyer at a law firm, which for some people, they think it's a bit of a contradiction in terms, because lawyer is probably one of the most old school professions you can possibly think of. We all walk around, well, actually in Hong Kong, some of us wear gowns and wigs at certain times of the day. So it is pretty old school. But I've been a tech lawyer for a really long time, about 20 years. And it's been a weird transformation for me, because when I first became a technology lawyer, it was during the dot-com crash back in the early 2000s. So anyone remembers that. I remember someone, a very senior partner within the firm, was saying there's no way you can ever be a technology lawyer. And for years, I was the sort of weird one who was kept in a room at the back of the office and nobody really knew what I did, nor did they care. So it's quite cool now, because actually I am the most trendy person in the office because I do tech law. And everyone's coming to me to ask me what's going on. How do I avoid being fined? What do I do about data security? Should we be investing in X, Y, and Z? What are the risks on this? So it's a massively exciting space to be in. There isn't a day that goes by where I don't come across something that's more cool than it was the day before. I have to say I'm pretty much more of a technology enthusiast. Probably that comes first, then lawyer. And that's probably why I'm so enamored with it all, rather than just saying, how can we sue people, or how do we draft some incredibly long contracts? But in what's happening in the space in terms of what clients are getting involved in, what law firms themselves are trying to do to sort of make themselves keep up with what's going on with the rest of the world, but also the innovation that we see and how we deal with that from a legal perspective is absolutely, people might not believe me because I'm a lawyer, but it's absolutely fascinating. There's so much going on, and it's kind of get too excited about it sometimes, but there we go.
Well, that's great. Alongside your self-deprecation about being a lawyer, you're very welcome here, and I think you made that point nicely about this. This is exciting stuff. Absolutely, it is. Let's not be apologetic about that. So thank you, Paul. And I love the fact also you're the example of one of those jobs that we didn't believe would exist 20 years ago. And I think there's probably quite a few in this room who are in that position. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Next up on my screen, I see Rachael Gibbens of Cisco. Afternoon, Rachael.
Hi Clive, nice to meet you. Hi everybody. Yeah, I'm Rachael. I'm based in Singapore as well. Jess, we should go for a drink sometime.
Yes.
And I'm the Director of Transformation, Chief of Staff and Head of Customer Success for the Customer Experience business for Cisco, which is about a $2 billion business out here. You know, Paul, interesting point you made about the law. You know, like we're going to have a whole topic on that conversation just alone. You know, how, you know, ripping off IP. I could tell you some stories about customers ripping off IP. But anyway, some of the key points that I would just like to make in terms of hybrid working, you know, Cisco, you know, took the policy decision to say that everybody is permitted to work remotely forever. Whenever they like, wherever they like, whatever device they like, because that's our business. So if you're going to sell it and you're going to do it for your customers, you've got to do it for your internal employees first. Some of the key challenges, how do our customers and how does Cisco itself manage how people will be productive in a hybrid environment? How do you keep motivation up? How do you keep energy up? How do you make sure that people are not, you know, losing the will to live on what we would say is WebEx, or you guys perhaps a Zoom, you know, fatigue, which is hours and hours. Also, one of the other interesting statistics is how much, you know, the average employee is working 20% longer now due to working hybrid. You know, how do you maintain the experience? How do you make it easy to join? And how do you, Paul, to your point, how do you make it secure? And then what are we going to do when we all go back to the office, right? How do we make people feel inclusive? Because we believe that there's going to be 80% of meetings in the future will have hybrid workforce where one or more employees will continue to work from home. So we will never go back. We believe in Cisco, bold statement, but we believe we will never go back to the way it was. Therefore, hybrid working is the future.
We like bold statements. Thank you, Rachael. I'm grateful that as well you've flagged there some potential downside, some potential risks alongside the excitement. It seems right that we flag the problems, and it's interesting, isn't it? You listen to the mainstream media and they talk about, you know, are people being productive at home? But it sounds like what you're flagging there is the opposite risk. That are we actually pushing people too hard in this new environment?
I had meetings from 1 a.m. till 7 this morning.
Wow. Okay, Rachael, good to have you here. Thank you so much. We're also joined by Sonal Patel. Sonal is from Quantcast. Hello there, Sonal.
Hi there. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I feel like I'm a kind of a baby between Jess and Paul. So I started off as a lawyer, and then quickly learned that there's a concept of trust and mistrust in being a lawyer. And then, of course, what did I do? I then went into technical sales. So obviously didn't learn my lesson. So I've been in Singapore almost 15 years. Quantcast is essentially a data-led SaaS advertising platform, trying to advertise in real time, which we do, using data insights in the best way possibly that we can due to GDPR. So there's a nod there to Paul. And I think what we're trying to do is to really think about ethical advertising. We know there are some challenges when it comes to advertising, but we also know there are challenges in terms of the employees that are working in advertising. It's a business that is 24/7. I can see there's a few companies here that we actually power and work with. And for me, I think data, rightly this was brought out by Justin, which was essentially, it is really about the people leveraging data. I guess for me, I'm a bit of a geek. I've worked across many of the big companies like Google and Twitter. And I think the biggest challenge I see is that we're all versed in this. And we've got to do a better job of trying to take that out to a layman's perspective as we then go and re-educate, re-evangelize, and revigor, concepts like the Kool-Aid moment. How do you kind of bridge that gap? And I think I was here before, and I inherited an amazing team. 50% of that team were new. I had joined literally a month before COVID started. So I've honestly gone through and seen what we need to do. How do we bridge it? What lessons that I've learned? I think these are things that are going to be so important as we try to triangulate that hybrid working landscape, and ensuring that all the touch points that we have, be them internal, which is with our own teams, who are the most important because they're going to be externally facing our clients, as well as our clients and our other partners. How can we interact and speak the same way? How do we make sure that we're actually being homogenous but being culturally diverse? Sitting in Asia is always something that's on our mind. And I think the other thing that is really, really topical is just that human touch. We've gone virtual. Everybody's talking about this metaverse, which is owned by everyone. I think everybody's going to jump into this at some point. But how do we make sure that that human touch is still maintained in an environment that is almost going virtual? To Rachel's point, right? How are we going to manage that? And how are we going to think about mental health, which is a key challenge in the advertising industry?
Absolutely, yeah. I really like that point you make, Sonal, there about the fact this isn't just about our own teams. It's if we are working with clients and we are working with clients, we need to make sure that our work practices are compatible with those. So this is perhaps a bigger, thornier challenge than it seems when we're just chatting among our own teams. Thanks for bringing that up. And also we have Vicky with us. Vicky, we met earlier. Now, most of us know you, Vicky, but just in case anyone hasn't met you or needs a quick reminder, who are you and what do you do?
Thanks, Clive. So I work in education. So obviously, people are at the centre of my thinking and what I do. And in particular, my interests lie in the future of work, the future skills agenda, and especially around leadership. So I think, one of the dynamics that I'm thinking about or talking to people about all the time is, how do you get people who have perhaps become, very senior in their careers, perhaps from a more, dare I use the language of digital immigrant kind of background. These are the people at the top of our organizations often, certainly those organizations that are not tech organizations, and yet they are the ones that are going to have to lead their organizations and their people into this sort of brave new world of hybrid working, of everything digital all the time. And of course, there are many leaders, and many of them, of course, join us on a monthly basis here, who get it, who have it, who know it. But there are many others that don't. And there's a huge fear factor. And when I was just listening to what Sonal was saying, we have to be better at recognizing that fear wherever it is in the organization. So yes, leaders are diverse. Some are, flying high in this space. Others are feeling anxious about what it means to them and their careers. At the same time, they, of course, are leading and managing diverse teams too. Teams that are made up of people who are ahead of the game, whilst others who have been in their roles perhaps for longer, less interested in doing something new. So a very, very dynamic challenge for leaders to take on. And that's probably the space in which I spend most of my time thinking and working.
Now, something I'd like to know a little bit more about from all of you, I think, is already people have alluded to the fact that we're not making these decisions in isolation. We exist within societies. And as Sonal's pointed out, within multicultural, diverse societies where perhaps expectations and the way we use technology might not always be the same. Could people give us maybe an overview of the way things are across the region, the way technology is moving, and how that's affecting people's expectations of the way they work? Jess, is that something you might want to start with?
I really wanted to jump in, but I thought that's really typical, so I'll allow others to have a voice because, yeah, this is totally the question that I'm very passionate about. So I think at Twilio, what we're seeing is that there are some major themes that probably we could drill deep into in other conversations. But one of the major themes that we're seeing is very much around this speed and agility piece. And that's very high level when we talk about technology. But if we drill into that, what we're seeing is this huge appetite to prototype and move fast. I think we all recognize that the pandemic has taught us we can't just sit in the status quo. We need to move fast. And I'm sure Rachael, Sonal, you're seeing this as well in your technology businesses, where like I'm literally sitting with customers. Yesterday, I was with a financial services customer in Singapore, and we prototyped for 3 hours, where we started with an idea, and by the end of it, we had something that we could pretty much put to production within a week. That's completely changed the game from probably 2 or 3 years ago. So I think we're seeing a lot around prototyping and speed and agility trends in technology. And then I think the other thing, which I'd love to see if everyone else has the same opinion, is we're seeing a real shift to wanting to look at what we call growth stacks. That's what we're calling it at Twilio. That's what I'm hearing a lot in the industry, where I think organizations are understanding that, yes, there are legacy systems and there are systems that run our organizations, but we need to create additional layers that give us that agility that I just spoke about. And so not just putting everything into one technology vendor or partner, but looking at how we can bring together lots of different building blocks or Lego blocks to build something that's unique. Our CEO, Jeff Lawson, also says this: differentiation is built, not bought in the marketplace now. And how do we look at that as organizations and start to go, well, if I create this stack that's got lots of different unique aspects that all works with APIs and different types of data integrations, that could be my competitive edge. So the trends that I'm seeing as I consult and speak to a lot of different organizations across Asia is, yeah, our core systems may remain the same or may move a little bit slower in its transformation, but how do we provide our organizations the ability to ideate, to prototype, and to create stacks of technology that can really bring amazing stuff to the table. And this isn't just with, entrepreneurial small businesses. A lot of the work I'm doing is in the bigger enterprise space where, a bank may say, we'll continue to be a bank and operate as a bank, but here is a fusion brand. Like in Thailand, we're working on something that does microloans so that there's no paperwork. You can literally spin up a loan within a day. And Twilio is working to innovate that. So, Rach, I hope you don't mind me calling you Rach. We're already friends. We just met here on Zoom, but you've got your hand up. I hope you're either agreeing or potentially disagreeing. But yeah, I'd say speed and agility is huge, and prototyping. And the next part is really around that growth stack, which I think is bringing unique aspects of tech together. So over to you.
Yeah, I mean, spot on. We call it full stack observability in Cisco. So how do you really do the end-to-end vision of what the customer's portfolio is? And then how do you make sure that, to Paul's point, when he said he went from being the most uncool person to now being the coolest person in the law firm because he works in tech, the CIO used to be somebody who was very much the CEO's right-hand man or woman. It's now actually, arguably, is it the other way around? Should the CIO be running the company? How do you have full stack observability? And then how do you integrate other customers' products? So at Cisco, we don't just work with our own products, we work with AWS. How do you work with different clouds? There's different types of cloud: multi-cloud, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud. How do you all work together? And then to Paul's point, how do you secure it all? It's a big world, right? It's a big market, and there's enough room for everybody in the market. We work with Twilio, we do work with Zoom. It's a big market, and there's room in the market for everybody. But I think the future is going to be really, really interesting in terms of, full stack observability, and then also on collaboration. And what's going to happen if those collaborations end up, falling out? And maybe Paul could tell us what would happen in terms of the fallout, given he's a lawyer.
My advice on that would be try not to fall out, quite frankly, unless you want to spend an absolute fortune on legal fees. What I'm seeing in terms, first off, one observation, we talk about hybrid working. I think I'm the only person who's actually in a physical office right now, right? Everyone else is at home. When you look at I'm not sure about everyone else who's joined because I can't see their pictures, but there we go. So I feel like hybrid is already the status quo. We're already there. In fact, if I didn't have to be in the office, I probably wouldn't be, but I have to be today, but there we are. But I think hybrid means different things for different people. And from a technology point of view, it's very much becoming about trying to be technology agnostic in terms of what you're doing and working with the technologies that you think suit you, that you want to work with as a business, and not finding that locks you out of markets. So go back, it feels like years and years ago, but it's really only probably about a decade ago, where you would have proprietary technology, you wouldn't have things talking to each other properly in terms of using APIs, and you'd be locked into using one platform, and you were stuck doing whatever was in that platform. And a big organization would buy something I'll give you an example. I bet there are still organizations using Lotus Notes because they bought it years and years ago and never figured out how to get out of it. I hope there's nobody on this who was actually still using that, but apologies if you're from Lotus, by the way. But that's changed now. And what we need to actually make hybrid working be a success, not just for organizations, but for the people within those organizations, is to understand that the technology has to be something that works for them and is what they want to use. We had a massive pain at the beginning of COVID where everything went terribly, terribly wrong, where they said, well, we've got all this technology, but it would only be available on iOS, so we can only use it on iPhone, which suddenly alienated all the Android users. And we solved that pretty quickly. But it's an example of the fact you can no longer essentially say, right, we're forcing a certain technology down your throat. So that's my first point. The second point comes across agility. I think a lot of people mistake agility for trying to be the first out of the gate, the fastest one, or being available all the time. And I think that's great for a company, particularly in the tech world where things do move very quickly and it's quite exciting. But I think that has a harmful effect on employees within a lot of the organizations, certainly perhaps in the tech sector where we see, certainly over the border in China, 996 in terms of working culture where people have to be always available, but also in terms of people not really switching off anymore. So hybrid working, my fear of that is that the technology is great, it becomes working all the time. People think that they have to be available all the time. They spend an entire day on Zoom calls into the night. And the impact that's actually having on the way people work and live, I think, is quite detrimental. So there's a load of stuff I just threw at you all.
No, but interesting though, that this excitement that I think Jess mentioned earlier about being able to be in a technological position and a cultural position to just get great things built and prototyped quickly, and all the opportunity that that brings. But you're worried there, Paul, that that's putting too much pressure on the people within our teams.
I feel like people now think that if they slow down for 1 second, and I think this is on a company point of view where it may be true, but as an individual, that they'll be left behind. And I think that's accelerated during COVID. We've seen some pretty negative technologies come out as part of hybrid working, which and again, I apologize if I'm annoying anyone, I hope none of them are clients, which I'll get into a load of trouble. But things such as monitoring how much time people are spending looking at their screen by leaving their cameras on, reporting how busy they are, monitoring keystrokes, essentially turning people into battery farm chickens, and things like that, which they sound really exciting. It's part of me think, wow, that technology is really cool. And I think, well, hang on, this is awful. This is like something from a dystopian sci-fi movie. So I think there needs to be a bit of an air of caution as to how things go forward.
Okay. Sonal, how do you feel about all this?
Yeah, I think that's, everybody brings all the right topics up. And you know, to Paul's point, one of the biggest challenges we see, obviously mental health, because advertising is 24/7, you're always going to have burnout. And that is one industry that we're just constantly seeing, especially if you're in the agency world, you're constantly seeing a drip feed of individuals coming in and leaving. Platforms, we do get that too, because obviously we're servicing the agencies. Where I distill all of this down to, at least personally from my view, is that one thing that keeps us human, which is communication. And because we sit in Asia, we are, most cases, not, and I can only speak for us here, but we are parachuting in and out of various markets. One, you've got obviously borders up, which allow you not to do that. So I think where we have, my team and I have identified efficiencies, leveraging platforms that can do, that can have translators in real time, going through some of the kind of nuances around the productization that we have that are inbuilt into virtual worlds. So we've been actually working with a UN translating company that does that to allow us to have these easy conversations. And again, Justin brought this up, some of those best conversations is just, it's tough to have that one-to-many approach in trying to really build some type of bond or synergy. And we've seen best practices generally across the board when you either have breakout rooms or you have a one-to-few where you can really go in and digest what are the actual challenges. I think the cultural nuance is people are not going to necessarily speak up in our region just because culturally it's a little bit more diverse. And so we've got to, one, recognize things like that even in the real world is still a problem. Imagine how much compounded it is in a virtual world. Not having cameras on is another thing that's always a challenge. So I think there's a couple of things here. One, we've got to make it entertaining, right? I think, Paul brought this up. There's going to be ridiculous hours. Rachael talked about the crazy hours in the evening. Maybe we can actually make it a little bit more fun and accessible so that people do feel a little bit more almost as if it's that water cooler moment. You know, either whether it's someone in our industry, an industry company, make sure that everybody puts a hat on, or a themed hat, themed event, or a way to just keep that connectivity. My fear actually across the whole of it is mental health. It can be diluted somewhat in terms of that one-to-one humanity. If you still maintain that, you actually then, you know, there's some way that you're connecting. And so mental health kind of, you're at least figuring out different ways that you can manage that. But if you don't have that human connection, I think we're still going to be compounded in some challenges, and burnout is going to be a huge part of that. Because even if we were going into the office, we all know we've got a checklist of many things to do, but when you have those 5 minutes, just getting that coffee and speaking to someone, it just takes you away from it all. So I think those are the things that are definitely on my mind as I think about what we do with our team and digesting markets.
I agree massively with that. I mean, Asia is an interesting market, and I've had the everyone's got their camera off phenomenon, which is really frustrating if you're speaking to a group for 2 hours and you can't see anyone. You're starting, what am I staring at? I'm a big supporter, and maybe I'm trying to start a movement, that while we have hybrid working, we're using a lot of technology, we can use a lot of that tech to decorporatize our business, to get rid of some of the hierarchies that you see in traditional business, particularly in parts of Asia. Hong Kong, we have a real issue of presenteeism and don't question the boss. Removing some of that, and I think the technology companies have provided the blueprint for that. So Rachael and Jessica probably talked to this, in that they have removed some of this tradition. I mean, I'm in a law firm where, you know, when I first started as a lawyer, you wouldn't dare speak to the senior partner because he'd shout at you, or in one particularly unfortunate case, throw things at you if you annoyed him in a particular way. Where I was once asked to stand at a certain place in office, I was like, why do you want me to stand there? Because the light was shining through the window and it was in his eyes. He wanted me to block it. And moving away from that, I can go on for hours with stories like this, but that'd be a completely different call. But I think making things a bit less corporate, trying to make people relate more within their workforce, trying to replace this water cooler chat that we're talking about, and the fact that you spend more time with your colleagues than you spend in many cases with your families. But when you're not actually seeing them in person, you're not building those personal bonds. Using technology to try and make that happen is a big deal for me.
Vicky.
Yes, I was just going to come in on that. Sorry, Clive, go ahead.
No, please do.
I think it's really interesting because, you know, everyone really has been flagging up sort of similar parts of the same equation. You know, Paul suggesting that, you know, we do have to watch out for some of this technology. All of us, I think, acknowledging, you know, the real challenges of the always on culture. And from my perspective, you know, this is really shifting the type of leadership that organizations need. You know, the old, and we heard this from Nicola Woolney at KPMG last month, when she was sort of, you know, she even had up on the screen kind of traditional ways of approaching things, you know, where we need to get to. And I think that's almost a sort of a picture that leadership across every industry needs to really reflect on. The leader is no longer just a sort of command and control figure. The leader has to be someone that does care about the well-being and the resilience of their people, that does understand that, yes, there may be an urgent project, but fine, once we're through that, I need to go circle back around to that person and make sure they get a little bit of time for themselves. So, you know, the emotional intelligence of a leader is just something that even 20 years ago was hardly on the leadership agenda at all. You know, it just wasn't part of the equation. Now, I would say it is one of the biggest things on the leadership agenda. And of course, again, like everything, it comes naturally to some, much less naturally to others. And in certain industries, dare I suggest, that more traditional industries, the challenge is greater, because the bureaucratic kind of model of leadership where, you know, the leader tells the people what to do and they go and do it, you know, it's still fairly embedded. You know, the tech companies have got a fresh start and typically a younger, more dynamic kind of workforce. But in those traditional industries, there is quite a journey to go on here for many leaders. And for many of them, it's quite exposing. Because, of course, you have to bring your own kind of authentic self to the table if you're going to have emotional intelligence. You cannot just be, you know, the buttoned up guy in the suit kind of thing. So, you know, there's a really big journey for some people to go on here. which they never envisaged having to go on. You know, when they got all of their degrees and all of their professional qualifications and got called to the bar or whatever it was, whatever language, you know, whatever profession they're in, they didn't have to think that they'd be back at school, you know, thinking about how do I get in touch with my real self and work, you know, and ensure my team are feeling okay. You know, that's just not the language of an awful lot of senior leaders.
So Vicky, you've identified the fact there is this risk of people leaving, this retention challenge. You've outlined the fact that it's by really paying attention to people's welfare and people's needs. Sounds like the leadership task that's top of the list in terms of retaining people. But you've also suggested there, I think, as Sonal drafted that, and Paul as well, that expectations between different regions and different cultures will vary. Does anyone else have
different generations? We've got a multi-generational workforce. And, you know, somebody was talking, was it Justin that was talking about purpose and passion earlier on too? You know, these are issues that leaders cannot ignore. If you don't know what makes your people, each individual person kind of, you know, really show up, you might not at the top of an organization, but you know, you need to know your people and they need to know their people. You know, what really makes people show up? How are they getting on, et cetera, et cetera? These are really significant leadership questions now, not just, you know, how do I write a process or how do I follow a process or design a process or re-engineer a process. That's not what leaders do anymore.
Rachael, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, the way I would use the analogy that when the plane's going down and you hit the turbulence, everyone looks at the flight attendants to remain calm. It's exactly the same for senior leaders across the board now. You know, people are looking for their senior leaders to come out and take a stance on political matters, on working from home, hybrid work. You know, if you look at Chuck, the CEO of Cisco, he's come out and made some very bold statements on Black Lives Matter in the States, which I was quite surprised because we're traditionally quite a hippie company that don't really get involved in politics. You know, you've got all sorts of things going on at the moment where like governments will come out with things and that'll throw you off the mark completely, where, you know, we work with the federal government in America and anyone working with the federal government has to be vaccinated. How do you take a stance on that when people don't want to be vaccinated? How do you get the right balance between keeping your people motivated, keeping their career progression going on, making sure they don't burn out? There was a question I saw that came into the chat room asking how do we do that in the big tech companies. So Cisco, for example, gives a day for me, and they've given 5 day for me's in the time I've been at the company, which is 18 months. So 79,000 people got 5 free extra days that they could take anytime they liked to do whatever they wanted. And those and they did it every time there was something big that happened. So if like, I'm sure they'll do another one now, the new Omicron variant has come out, they'll just suddenly give you all a day off and they'll tell you to all take the day off. So it's things like that, it's getting the right balance. But to Vicky's point, you know, the traditional command and control as a leader is gone, and it's got to be all about empathy now. You've got to, and actually you've got to be everything. You've got to be empathy, but you've also got to be a numbers person as well.
Yeah, I mean, Rachael and I probably have similar, you know, ideas here, but I think what I've loved, I got 2 points, I think. First of all, when it comes to how do we start to address the burnout, similar to Rachael, we've got company breaks. So we came out and said, like, it's good for you to take your individual days, but you've still got people pestering you because the rest of the organization's working. How about we all just take the same break together? And obviously there'll be support staff for the customers, etc. But for a large majority of the company, we're doing company-wide breaks, which I think is a really nice way of, you know, I'm finding when we do these, the teams are coming together where possible and we're safe to bond as well, which is another additional layer. But I think there's 2 points that are coming off. I think what Vicky said is we speak a lot about hybrid work and we look at that in the lens of the location. So I'm going to work from home and work from, but the real bigger part of the topic of hybrid work is what leadership looks like in hybrid work. And I think that's a large topic of what we're trying to explore today is, have you actually stood back? Every person that's on this call is a leader and gone, what does my leadership style look in the hybrid workplace? Not where will I sit in the hybrid workplace? That's obviously a byproduct, but how am I going to manage that world when one of my key salespeople says, hey, Jess, I'm going to go over and work in France for 6 months when all of their customers sit in Thailand?
So we're starting to hear now about not just the challenge we've got, but how we're meeting that challenge. I wonder if I could turn to maybe Paul and Sonal and see if either of you have got any thoughts on, having identified what we're up against, what are the positive ways forward?
Sure, yeah. So we've actually, we have gone through this, to be quite honest. And again, I told you, I've baptism by fire with COVID and joining this company. So a couple of things. We offer 5 days holiday, again, similar to Cisco, but we will take it at the same time. And that's to really make sure everybody can really, so we have core skeleton teams, but the majority of us take it at the same time. We offer 2 weeks to work from anywhere in the world. Even if your clients are based in Asia, we will figure out a way, we'll have some teams that can help. That is to really offset the fact that the teams have done so much work above and beyond what they should have done in their 2 years from hybrid style working. In terms of leadership, some of the initiatives I drove, again, I didn't know all of my team when I joined the company and we all went into lockdown. I made sure that every day except Friday, we would have some type of stand-up, 2 days specifically around work, and then 2 days specifically not related to work at all. And it was very much related to your bucket list. Give us 15 slides on places you want to go, things you want to do, completely random things, 5 things you would buy, your recommendation of things that you enjoy. And that really broke down people in terms of getting to know each other better, because this was 50% of the team didn't know the other 50%, etc., etc. And it became a theme. And then anyone who's late for a Zoom call or a Google Meets call, the last person has to tell the joke. It's just small little things like that that really, really keep leadership, so myself and anyone beyond me, really integrated with the team. And they don't cost much. It is just showing that you really are trying to be your authentic self with the team. And I think that is so important because we're all fractured, especially tech companies. We work all over the place. My headquarters in San Francisco, and we're on ridiculous hours. But we want to make sure that not only do we do that, but then headquarters as well does initiatives. We will have, so little things like we'll have 35 questions, and we'll make sure that people can actually phone in and actually try and do quizzes using those questions to keep engaged. We've done the same thing with clients, and it has been a roaring success where we'll just give them some gift vouchers. But we've been able to maintain that human touch. So I think for me, it's that human touch. To Jess's point, leadership needs to make sure we authentically own that, because we've always owned that. Nothing's changed there.
Paul, what have you seen in terms of positive ways to get through these challenges?
For law firms, it's been difficult, actually. We've had a lot of challenges in terms of how we want to present both leaders towards the rest of the teams, making teams be more sociable, essentially we have a phrase about, we consider ourselves to be a purpose-led law firm. So we try and essentially bring our humanity to work, make sure we do the right thing, make sure we stand by people. And what's been interesting is that, when I said law firms are very traditional, the majority of people embrace that, but some people don't want that. They're like, I became a lawyer because I want to be surrounded by loads and loads of paper. I want to go to court. I want to do things on a set day. And I've been watching, I don't know, whichever QC TV series. I mean, I basically became a lawyer because of Ally McBeal, and it's been nothing like that, actually. I have to be honest with you. I was incredibly disappointed, but never mind. That's another story. But it's been difficult because also law is a very traditional industry. And so we do have to be in court at certain times. We do have to attend an arbitration. We do still, which drives me nuts, have loads and loads of paper. We have paper files, courts accept paper files, which means that we often can't all be working from home. So it's a challenge I'm still dealing with in terms of how we approach things. I mean, I'd like to think of myself as a very approachable leader, as someone who will happily talk to people and engage. And I'm pretty open about the sort of things I do, and I do things that other lawyers may not do. I do a radio show, and I'm a DJ as well as being a lawyer, which none of you obviously knew about because I can see the reaction on one of your faces. Google me, you'll be horrified. But it's making sure that everyone is actually part of it. So you're not forcing the people who don't want to engage in this to then say, right, I'm going to tell you what I was doing at the weekend, when actually that's my business. I'm interested. It's really matching things to individuals. And I think that is one of the big challenges that traditional industries have, maybe not so much tech industries, but maybe I'm wrong, in terms of attracting and retaining talent, because everybody is different. Everyone has a different skill set. There was always a belief, and this used to really wind me up, that lawyers were all the same. They were very rigid, very strict, logic focused, probably very boring on an evening out. And I hated originally going into that mindset and thinking that's what people expect you to be like, when actually now a lawyer is no longer someone who just knows black letter law, because frankly, we can get our AI to do a lot of our legal research. We get a lot of it. There's the technology advances in law are incredible. And what's become more and more important is really EQ, how you deal with people, how you manage people, how you manage clients, and how you manage opponents.
Or EQ, just for everyone?
Essentially, it's how you deal. It's humanity. It's basically think of IQ as being how intelligent you are, EQ as being your emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
Brilliant. We've got to wrap up fairly soon, but Vicky, just of the things you've heard in terms of the way people are getting through these challenges, through changing their leadership style, or some of the more practical technological arrangements, what's top of your list in terms of the good stuff?
I think it's continuing to explore, different ways of doing things, because we haven't got the answers yet. I mean, Rachel's been putting some questions in the chat there, how do you hear from the introverts in the room, as an example. I don't think any of us have yet cracked all of these things. The one that's often in my mind is, and I think Sonal touched on it earlier, how do you create the water cooler moment? The kind of synchronicities and the serendipities that happen in a physical workplace. Very hard to create, bumping into someone online. I think we've still got some issues to crack at the margins, but I would say that I think, it's incredible what people have achieved in the last 18 months. We've heard from Sonal, she'd never met her team before. Rachel, I'm guessing when you said that you'd been at Cisco only 18 months, you're in, the same sort of situation. We have all achieved unbelievable things. We are still just about on our feet. But I think, yes, of course, there's a journey. There's still things that we've got to do at the margins. There are still complicated issues, that we're all grappling with. But I think technology, even though it's rare to hear me speak about technology, will help us with this. I believe somewhere there are some tech pixies, busily working on creating some kind of water cooler app or something of that sort. That we can use to actually just randomly, match someone else in our firm and say, hey, put in 5 minutes to talk to this person.
There've been some attempts at it over the years. It feels like years. It has been years. Actually, COVID's been going on pretty much for 2 years now. Two things. Rachel said, what do you do when employees get stuck in other countries and end up working there and deal with tax, domicile, insurance? You just deal with it. I don't think anyone's got an answer of what to do. You can't, if you tell those people they can't go there, they will eventually quit. So you just have to think about how you're going to solve it from a tax point of view. We've found every single case is different on that. But in terms of water cooler moment, I think forcing people to do things is the disaster. So I got stuck on a Zoom drinks, which was from 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. And then what was going through my head as I'm sitting there, slowly getting drunk, staring at a computer screen with a lot of people who also don't really want to be there. We all thought we had to be there because it'd be arranged by someone. Things like that are the things that fail. I don't know if anyone else has experienced that, but it's and then if you and all that happens is you do Zoom drinks, you get too drunk, the Zoom drinks finishes, and you start buying crap on Amazon you don't need because you've had too much to drink and you waste your money.
What a wonderful example of the fact that challenges and we think we find the ways through. We're just uncovering unexpected problems that we never knew. And that's what we'll probably spend the rest of 2022 working on, is fixing those challenges that have cropped up that we didn't expect. I've really enjoyed the last half hour or so that we've spent together. I'm absolutely full of gratitude for the brilliant insights that everyone's brought to this. There's been a lot of good stuff here, but also it's been quite entertaining in the chat as well, seeing the various different comments and insights and ideas that have been exchanged there. You've all been brilliant. I really want to say a big thank you to Jess OReilly from Twilio, Paul Haswell from Pinsent Masons, Sonal Patel from Quantcast, Rachael Gibbens from Cisco, and of course Vicky from BPP, Vicky Knight, who's been with us throughout the whole of this year, helping us bring all these different insights to you. I think you've kind of helped us round off this particular chapter brilliantly. Thanks so much to all of you.